I never thought I'd fall in love at 40, especially not with my hairdresser. But life has its way of surprising you when you least expect it, and sometimes the most beautiful stories begin in the most ordinary places. My name is Marcus Bennett, and until 6 months ago, I was just another divorced executive living in Boston, drowning myself in work and pretending that loneliness was a choice rather than a condition. I had everything society told me I should want: a corner office at a prestigious consulting firm, a luxury apartment overlooking the harbor, and enough money to never worry about bills. But I also had something else, a secret I'd kept buried so deep that even I had almost forgotten it was there. It started on a rainy Tuesday in October. My usual stylist, an elderly woman named Betty, who'd been cutting my hair for 15 years, had retired, and I found myself walking into Artisan Cuts, a modern salon in the South End. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, shaking water from my umbrella. "Welcome to Artisan Cuts," a voice called out. "I'll be with you in just a moment." That voice belonged to Thomas Walker. I didn't know it then, but that voice would become the soundtrack to my new life. When he emerged from the back room, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a flutter in my stomach, a quickening of pulse. He was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with dark blonde hair styled in an effortlessly modern way. His sleeve-rolled white shirt revealed forearms decorated with artistic tattoos, and his green eyes carried a warmth that seemed to melt the October chill right out of my bones. "I'm Thomas," he said, extending his hand. "Do you have an appointment?" I cleared my throat, suddenly aware that I'd been staring. "No, my regular stylist retired. Betty, from Classic Cuts?" His face lit up with recognition. "Ah, Betty! She's sent a few clients our way. Here, let me check if I can fit you in." He glanced at his tablet, scrolling through what I assumed was his schedule. "You're in luck. Had a cancellation. I can take you now if you'd like." I nodded, following him to the washing station. As he began to wash my hair, his fingers working through my graying temples with just the right pressure, I closed my eyes. It had been so long since anyone had touched me with such care, even in this professional context. "So what did Betty usually do for you?" he asked, his voice soft above the sound of running water. "Just a basic businessman's cut," I replied. "Nothing fancy." He made a thoughtful noise. "Mind if I make a suggestion? Your face has great bone structure. We could do something that frames it better, something a bit more contemporary but still professional." "I trust your judgment," I said, surprising myself. I wasn't usually one to embrace change. As he worked, we talked. He told me about his journey from a small town in Oregon to Boston, his passion for art that translated into hairstyling, his dog Charlie, who waited for him at home. I found myself sharing things too, about my divorce 3 years ago, my daughter in college, my growing dissatisfaction with corporate life. "Sometimes," he said, standing back to examine his work, "we get so caught up in being who we think we should be that we forget who we are." His eyes met mine in the mirror, and for a moment I felt exposed, as if he could see right through the carefully constructed facade I'd built over the years. The cut was perfect, professional, but with an edge of style I'd never dared to try before. When I reached for my wallet, he handed me his card. "Come back in 4 weeks," he said. "We'll maintain this look." I looked at the card in my hand. Thomas Walker, hair artist, with his cell number below. My fingers trembled slightly as I tucked it into my wallet. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Thomas's hands in my hair, about the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, about the authentic way he spoke about his life. It had been years since I'd allowed myself to acknowledge these feelings, these attractions. After my marriage ended, I'd thrown myself into work, avoiding any serious self-reflection about why my relationship with Sarah had failed. The next 4 weeks crawled by. I found myself checking my appearance more often, wondering if the cut was holding up well. I even downloaded Instagram and found Thomas's professional account, scrolling through his work photos and the occasional personal post. In one, he was at the beach with his dog Charlie, a golden retriever with a goofy smile. In another, he was at a local art gallery, standing proudly next to a painting he'd created. When I returned for my next appointment, Thomas greeted me like an old friend. "Marcus, The cut held up well, he said, running his fingers through my hair to examine it. The simple touch sent electricity down my spine. Thanks to your skill, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. This time, our conversation went deeper. He told me about coming out to his parents at 19, about their initial struggle and eventual acceptance. I listened, my heart pounding, recognizing pieces of myself in his story. When he finished cutting my hair, I gathered my courage. Would you like to get coffee sometime? I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. He paused, studying me in the mirror. As friends, or? I'm not sure, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I haven't. Understanding dawned in his eyes. How about we start with coffee and see where it goes? We met that weekend at a small cafe in the South End. I arrived early, my hands shaking as I ordered an Americano. When Thomas walked in, wearing jeans and a fitted sweater instead of his usual salon attire, I nearly spilled my coffee. Nervous? He asked, sliding into the seat across from me. Terrified, I admitted. I've never done this before. Done what? Had coffee with a friend? Been honest with myself, I said quietly. About who I am, about what I want. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. There's no rush, Marcus, no pressure. We can just talk. And talk we did. For hours. About everything and nothing. About art and business, about families and fears, about the masks we wear and the truths we hide. As the afternoon light faded to dusk, I realized I hadn't checked my phone once. A minor miracle for a workaholic like me. I should get going, Thomas said eventually. Charlie needs his evening walk. Of course, I said, trying to hide my disappointment. But Marcus? He paused, pulling on his coat. I'd like to do this again. Maybe dinner next time? I nodded, unable to suppress my smile. I'd like that. The next few weeks were a blur of texts, coffee meetings, and increasingly intimate conversations. Thomas was patient with my hesitation, my ingrained fears, my moments of panic about what this all meant for my carefully constructed life. He never pushed, never demanded, just offered unwavering support and understanding. Our first real date was at a small Italian restaurant in the North End. I spent an hour choosing what to wear, feeling like a teenager again. When I arrived, Thomas was already there, looking effortlessly elegant in a navy blazer. He stood to greet me, and for a moment, we both hesitated. Was this a handshake moment, a hug, something else? He solved the dilemma by pulling me into a gentle embrace. You look great, he whispered, and I could feel my face flush. Over pasta and wine, our conversation flowed naturally. Thomas told me about his latest art project, a series of portraits exploring identity and transformation. It's about the faces we show the world, he explained, versus the ones we keep hidden. I've been hiding for so long, I admitted, twirling pasta around my fork. Sometimes I wonder if I even know who I really am anymore. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. You're brave, Marcus, braver than you give yourself credit for. My daughter Lauren is coming home from college next weekend, I said suddenly. She's always been perceptive. I think I want to tell her. Thomas's eyes widened slightly. Are you sure? No, I laughed nervously, but I'm tired of pretending. She deserves to know who her father really is. The following weekend, I picked Lauren up from Logan Airport. At 20, she was becoming a remarkable young woman, studying psychology at UC Berkeley. We went to our favorite brunch spot, and over French toast and coffee, I took the biggest breath of my life. Honey, there's something I need to tell you, I began, my voice shaking. She put down her fork and looked at me with those keen eyes that always seemed to see right through me. Dad, are you dating someone? I nearly choked on my coffee. How did you? Dad, please. You're actually smiling in your texts now. You've started using emojis. Something's clearly different. I took another deep breath. Yes, I am seeing someone. His name is Thomas. There was a moment of silence, and I felt my heart might explode. Then Lauren reached across the table and took my hand. Dad, she said softly, are you happy? Tears welled up in my eyes. Yes, sweetheart, I really am. Then that's all that matters. She squeezed my hand, though I do have about 1,000,000 questions. We spent the next 2 hours talking, really talking, in a way we hadn't since before the divorce. I told her about Thomas, about my journey of self-discovery, about the years of denial and fear. She listened, asked questions, and finally said something that broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. You know, this explains so much about you and Mom. I always felt like there was something missing, even when you were trying so hard to be perfect parents. That evening, I called Thomas and told him about the conversation. She wants to meet you, I said, if you're comfortable with that. Of course, he replied. Should I be nervous? Probably. She's scarier than any client I've ever faced in the boardroom. We arranged dinner at my apartment the next evening. I cooked, or attempted to, while Thomas brought wine and dessert. Lauren arrived first, helping me finish the salad while giving me last-minute fashion advice. When Thomas arrived, Lauren opened the door. I watched from the kitchen as they met, my daughter and the man who had helped me find myself. They hugged immediately, as if they'd known each other for years. So, Lauren said over dinner, you're the reason my dad's hair suddenly got stylish. Thomas laughed. Guilty as charged, though he had good raw material to work with. You should have seen his hair in the 90s, Lauren said, reaching for her phone. Mom showed me some old photos. Oh no, I groaned, but it was too late. Soon they were bonding over embarrassing stories about me, and I couldn't even be annoyed because watching them together made my heart feel full in a way I'd never experienced. After Lauren returned to college, Thomas and I settled into a rhythm. We took things slowly, very slowly. Our first kiss didn't happen until our 6th date, outside his apartment after dinner. It was gentle, tentative, and perfect. When we broke apart, I saw tears in his eyes. What's wrong? I asked, worried. Nothing, he smiled. I know how big this is for you. Thank you for trusting me. As winter settled over Boston, our relationship deepened. Thomas introduced me to his world, art galleries, underground music venues, cozy bookstores I'd walked past for years without noticing. I introduced him to mine, charity galas, business dinners, walks along the harbor. We were building a bridge between our worlds, creating something entirely new. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. My first panic attack came after running into a senior partner from my firm while Thomas and I were having dinner. The partner had smiled and waved, but I'd spent the next hour convinced my career was over. Thomas held me through it, his steady presence anchoring me as I spiraled. You don't have to come out at work, he assured me. Not until you're ready. But I want to, I replied. I'm tired of compartmentalizing my life. I'm tired of pretending. The decision to come out at work was arguably harder than telling Lauren. I scheduled a meeting with my managing partner, Richard, a man I'd worked with for 15 years. The thing is, Richard, I said, sitting in his office one morning, I've recently started seeing someone. A man. Richard looked at me for a long moment, then smiled. Marcus, did you really think this would change anything? You're one of our best partners. Your personal life is your business. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Thank you. Just one thing, he added as I stood to leave. Bring him to the holiday party. I want to meet the person who's finally made you take a vacation. The firm's holiday party was at the Four Seasons. Thomas wore a perfectly tailored suit, his hair styled impeccably, of course. As we walked in together, his hand on the small of my back, I felt none of the fear I'd expected. Instead, I felt pride. You know, Thomas whispered as we danced later that evening, you've come a long way from that nervous man who walked into my salon. I had a good guide, I replied, pulling him closer. Spring arrived in Boston, bringing with it new challenges and joys. Thomas had been commissioned to create a series of paintings for a new boutique hotel, which meant long hours in his studio. I found myself spending more and more evenings there, watching him work, falling in love with the way his face scrunched in concentration. One night, as he painted and I pretended to review contracts on my laptop while actually just watching him, he suddenly turned to me. Move in with me, he said. I blinked, surprised. What? Move in with me, he repeated, putting down his brush. You're here most nights anyway. Charlie misses you when you're not here, and He paused, running a paint-stained hand through his hair. I sleep better when you're beside me. The old Marcus would have panicked, would have made lists of pros and cons, would have worried about what others would think. But I wasn't that Marcus anymore. Yes, I said simply. We decided to find a new place together, something that would be ours from the start. We found a converted loft in South End, with high ceilings perfect for Thomas's art and enough space for both my antique furniture and his more modern pieces. The process of combining our lives was both terrifying and exhilarating. "What are we going to do with two coffee makers?" I asked one day, surrounded by moving boxes. "Keep both," Thomas replied, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "One for your boring corporate coffee, one for my fancy artisanal beans." Living together brought its own set of adjustments. I learned that Thomas was definitely not a morning person, that he had a habit of leaving half-finished cups of tea everywhere, and that he talked in his sleep, usually about hair colors and art supplies. He learned that I was compulsively neat, that I needed absolute silence to work, and that I had a secret addiction to reality TV shows. But we also learned the deeper things: how to read each other's moods, how to give space when needed, how to support each other's dreams. I learned to be more spontaneous. He learned to appreciate the security of routine. Our first major test came when Thomas's parents announced they were visiting from Oregon. Despite their eventual acceptance of his sexuality, they hadn't met any of his partners in years. I was nervous, but Thomas was terrified. "They're going to love you," I assured him, though my own stomach was in knots. His parents, James and Ellen Walker, arrived on a sunny Saturday morning. Ellen immediately pulled Thomas into a tight hug, while James stood back, looking slightly uncomfortable. I stepped forward, extending my hand. "Mr. Walker, Mrs. Walker, I'm Marcus. It's wonderful to meet you." Ellen bypassed my hand and hugged me too. "Please, it's Ellen and James, and thank you for making our Tommy so happy." Over dinner that evening, I watched Thomas gradually relax as his parents made an obvious effort to engage with both of us. James, it turned out, shared my passion for classic cars, while Ellen was fascinated by the art world and asked endless questions about Thomas's work. Later that night, as we got ready for bed, Thomas was unusually quiet. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah," he said softly. "It's just, that's the first time they've ever treated one of my relationships as real, as permanent." I pulled him close. "Well, it is real and permanent. Summer brought a heat wave and a surprise visit from Lauren, who had landed an internship in Boston. She moved into our guest room for 2 months, and our loft was filled with the sound of her laughter, the smell of Thomas teaching her to cook, and the joy of family dinners. One evening, I came home to find them both covered in flour, attempting to make pasta from scratch. "Dad," Lauren exclaimed, "we're making dinner." "I can see that," I laughed, taking in the disaster that was our kitchen. "Successfully?" "Define success," Thomas grinned, flour dusting his cheek. Watching them together, I felt a completeness I'd never known possible. This was family, messy, imperfect, and absolutely perfect at the same time. But life had one more challenge in store for us. In August, I received an offer to head up our firm's London office. It was the kind of opportunity I dreamed of throughout my career: prestigious, challenging, and incredibly well compensated. "You should take it," Thomas said when I told him, his voice carefully neutral. "Not without you," I replied immediately. "Marcus, this is huge for your career. You have your gallery show coming up, your clients, your life here." He put his hands on either side of my face. "I can paint anywhere. I can cut hair anywhere. But this opportunity, this is once in a lifetime." "Are you sure?" I asked, searching his eyes. "On one condition," he smiled. "We get married first. I hear the UK has excellent spousal visa policies." I stared at him, my heart stopping then racing. "Thomas Walker, did you just propose to me in the context of immigration law?" He laughed, then got down on one knee. "Marcus Bennett, will you marry me? Not for the visa, but because I want to spend the rest of my life with you, whether that's in Boston or London or anywhere else in the world." "Yes," I whispered, pulling him up into a kiss. "Yes to all of it." We were married 2 months later in a small ceremony in the Boston Public Garden. Lauren was my best person, while Thomas's best friend from art school stood up for him. Charlie, wearing a bow tie, carried our rings. Ellen cried. James shook my hand with genuine warmth, and my mother, who had been quietly supportive throughout everything, hugged us both and whispered, "Finally, you're happy." Now, as I write this from our new flat in London, overlooking the Thames, I can hear Thomas in his studio, talking to Charlie as he works on his latest painting. His hair salon in Notting Hill is already developing a following, and my work is challenging and fulfilling. Lauren is planning to study abroad in London next semester, and we're converting the second bedroom into a space for her. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I think about that rainy day in October when I walked into Artisan Cuts. How one simple decision to try a new hairdresser changed everything. How love can find you at any age, in any place, if you're brave enough to recognize it and strong enough to embrace it. Thomas comes in now, paint on his clothes, love in his eyes. Still working? He asks, massaging my shoulders. I reach up and take his hand, our wedding rings catching the light. Just finishing something, I say, and close my laptop. Some stories don't need an ending because they're still being written, one day at a time, with love, courage, and maybe a little bit of hair product.